Hey everyone, it's Jimmy here as usual, gently asking you to hit the like and subscribe buttons and the notification bell and turn on all notifications. Also, leave a comment down below and let me know where you're listening from, or just drop a quick, I'm doing my part. Anyway, as always, we've got a lot of unsolved mysteries to explain, so let's get down to business. If you've spent any time online, you know that for a large portion of the population, the cat reigns supreme. It's a creature of memes, a furry companion sleeping on our keyboards, a domestic overlord demanding tribute in the form of treats. But this modern, pampered pet is the descendant of an animal that held a far more complex and paradoxical status in the ancient world. In the land of the pharaohs, the cat wasn't just a pet. It was a pest controller, a divine symbol, a cherished family member, and a legally protected citizen. In a strange and dark twist, the beloved feline was also a mass-produced commodity for the afterlife. The story of the cat in ancient Egypt is a journey from utilitarian hunter to holy icon, and it reveals the profound complexities of Egyptian society, religion, and commerce. It's a common belief that the Egyptians were the first to domesticate the cat, but the story actually begins elsewhere. The first steps toward the partnership between human and feline were taken not along the Nile, but in the Fertile Crescent of the Near East, around 10,000 years ago. As early humans transitioned from nomadic life to settled agriculture, they created a new kind of ecosystem. Their granaries, overflowing with the bounty of the harvest, became a paradise for rodents. This, in turn, attracted a stealthy, efficient predator, the local wildcat, known as Felis sylvestris libica. Unlike dogs, which were likely actively domesticated by humans, cats seem to have domesticated themselves. They were drawn to human settlements by the promise of an easy meal, and early farmers quickly recognized their value. These felines were a living, purring form of pest control, protecting the vital food stores that were the very foundation of civilization. A mutually beneficial alliance was formed. Humans offered scraps and a degree of safety, and in return, the cats kept the granaries clear of vermin. But they did more than just hunt mice. In a land where venomous snakes and scorpions were a constant household threat, the cat was also a formidable protector. Its practical value was immediately apparent in the agrarian society of the Nile Valley. Early artistic evidence confirms this role. A tomb fresco from the 21st century BC shows a cat confronting a rodent, a clear celebration of its pest control prowess. Because cats entered human society on their own terms, retaining their independence and mysterious nature, they were never seen as mere servants. They were powerful, autonomous allies, and this perception of agency would become the bedrock for their incredible ascent to divinity. The cat's journey from the granary to the temple was a gradual one, built upon admiration for its unique qualities. The Egyptians saw in the cat a creature of compelling duality. It was a fierce hunter, yet a gentle, nurturing mother. It was elegant and graceful, yet capable of sudden, lethal speed. These were characteristics they associated with the divine. It's crucial to understand that the Egyptians didn't worship the cats themselves. Rather, they saw these animals as living, breathing vessels that the gods could choose to inhabit, earthly manifestations of divine power. While early feline deities existed, such as Bastet, a protector against snakes, the cat became most famously associated with the goddess Bastet. Originally, Bastet was a formidable and dangerous deity depicted with the head of a lioness, much like the warrior goddess Sekhmet. In fact, the two were often seen as two sides of the same divine coin. Sekhmet represented the sun's scorching, destructive fury, while Bastet represented its gentle, life-giving warmth. As the domestic cat became a more common and beloved presence in Egyptian homes, Bastet's iconography softened. Around the second millennium BC, her image transformed from the fearsome lioness into the familiar, elegant figure of a woman with the head of a domestic cat. This religious shift perfectly mirrored the cat's physical integration into the household. Bastet became the goddess of the home, fertility, joy, and the protector of women and children. She was a deity who could be understood by observing the family pet. Amulets bearing her image were worn for protection, especially during childbirth, bringing the power of a great goddess into the most intimate moments of life. Her cult reached its zenith at her sacred city of Bubastis in the Nile Delta. The Greek historian Herodotus, visiting in the 5th century, described her temple as a place of incredible beauty and the annual festival in her honor as the most joyous in all of Egypt. He wrote of barges packed with hundreds of thousands of pilgrims floating down the Nile, singing, dancing, and drinking wine in a massive, ecstatic celebration of this cat goddess. The cat's elevated status had profound real-world consequences, enshrined in both law and deeply held social custom. Throughout much of Egyptian history, the animal was protected by the state. Harming a cat was a serious crime, and slaying a cat even unintentionally would shorten your life significantly. The historian Diodorus Siculus, who visited Egypt in the 1st century BC, provided a stunning eyewitness account of this fervor. He described an incident where a Roman diplomat accidentally eliminated a cat. Despite the fact that Egypt was desperately trying to curry favor with the rising power of Rome, and even though the pharaoh himself sent officials to plead for the man's life, it was no use. An enraged mob gathered at the Roman's house, dragged him out, and eliminated him. This shocking event reveals that the reverence for cats wasn't just a doctrine of the priests, but a passionate, grassroots belief that could even override political necessity. This devotion extended to the animal's death. Herodotus reported that when a family's pet cat died of natural causes, the entire household would enter a period of deep mourning. He even noted that they would shave off their eyebrows as a sign of their grief for their fallen cat. He also recounted the bizarre behavior of Egyptians during a house fire. He claimed they would neglect extinguishing the flames to form a human blockade to prevent a mother cat from going in to attempt to save her kittens in vain. Whether this is true, or just another one of Herodotus's stories, isn't known. The cat's sacred status was even weaponized, according to a later legend about the Battle of Pelusium in 525 BC. The story goes that the Persian king, Cambyses II, knowing of the Egyptians' devotion, had his soldiers carry cats and other sacred animals into battle. The Egyptian soldiers, horrified at the thought of harming the creatures, supposedly surrendered, choosing defeat over sacrilege. While likely an exaggeration, the tale underscores how deeply the cat's sanctity was ingrained in the Egyptian identity. Ancient historians could repeat this story, and others would accept that this level of extreme devotion to cats was a definite Egyptian cultural trait. For all the love and legal protection afforded to cats, their story has a deeply unsettling and contradictory chapter. The Egyptian belief in an eternal afterlife led to the widespread practice of mummification, and this included animals for several reasons. The most straightforward was the mummification of a beloved pet. Just as a pharaoh was buried with his treasures, a family might mummify their cat to ensure their cherished companion could join them in the next world. The discovery of a 2,000-year-old pet cemetery at the port of Berenice, where nearly 600 cats and dogs were buried with collars and other adornments, shows evidence of deep care. However, these lovingly prepared pets represent only a tiny fraction of the millions of cat mummies produced in ancient Egypt. The vast majority were part of a massive religious industry centered on votive offerings. Pilgrims flocking to temples, especially the great cult center of Bastet at Bubastis, would purchase a mummified cat to offer to the goddess as a physical prayer, a way to gain her favor. This incredible demand fueled a sprawling economy. Temples operated large-scale catteries, breeding cats not as pets, but as a crop to be harvested. Archaeological evidence from sites like Saqqara and Bubastis has uncovered vast catacombs containing staggering numbers of mummies. In the late 19th century, one such site yielded so many, an estimated 180,000, that they were shipped to England by the ton to be ground down into fertilizer of all things. And yeah, I'm just going to let that sink in for a second. Ancient mummified Egyptian cats were shipped to Victorian England as fertilizer. Scans of these cat mummies reveal a grim truth. Most were young cats, under 2 years old, that had been deliberately slain. This created a stark division. The illegal elimination of a cat in the street was a capital crime, but the ritualized sacrifice of a cat within a temple was a sacred act. The industry was so commercialized that archaeologists have even found fake cat mummies sold to pilgrims by unscrupulous con artists. Or perhaps I should say that these con artists were actually the good guys because their cat mummies were made of clay and wrapped into a cat form. The cat's exalted status persisted for thousands of years, enduring through changes in dynasty and even surviving the Greek Ptolemaic rule. The cult of Bastet was still immensely popular when Egypt became a province of the Roman Empire. But the animal's divine protection could not withstand the monumental ideological shift that was coming. The rise of Christianity brought a new worldview, one that was fundamentally at odds with the Egyptian pantheon of animal-headed gods. Beginning in the 4th century, a series of decrees by Christian Roman emperors, most notably Theodosius I, sought to eradicate paganism across the empire. These laws prohibited sacrifices, forbade visits to temples, and eventually ordered their destruction or conversion into churches. The attack was on the entire religious structure that had supported the cat's sacred status. With the closure of the temples of Bastet, the great festivals ceased, the priesthood was disbanded, and the vast mummification industry collapsed. By the 5th century, the old gods had been officially silenced, and the cat's divine aura was stripped away by imperial decree. On the morning of August 20th, 1994, 46-year-old Gene Payne stepped out of his mobile home in rural Pima County, Arizona, to feed his livestock just as he did every day. Gene told his wife he'd be back shortly and headed out on foot into the desert air. However, the unthinkable happened. Gene never returned. Despite an intensive search later that day, no trace of the rancher was ever found. Gene's disappearance was especially puzzling because of who he was. He was a devoted husband, father, and grandfather, living a quiet life on his modest ranch in Avra Valley. A prior back injury had left Gene partially disabled, and he could only walk short distances. Nonetheless, he stuck to his routine of caring for his animals, including feeding some cattle at his mother's nearby property each morning. He had no known enemies or criminal history, and he was close to his family and friends. The idea that Gene would simply walk away from his life made little sense to those who knew him, which made his sudden disappearance all the more disturbing. When Gene failed to come back that August morning, his wife and teenage son immediately went out looking for him around the ranch. After finding no sign of him, they quickly called the Pima County Sheriff's Department for help. Deputies and local volunteers soon combed the area, conducting ground and air searches across the desert, yet their efforts found absolutely nothing. In this rural area, nobody had seen or heard anything unusual at the time Gene went missing. There were no footprints, no vehicle tracks, No broken fencing or signs of a struggle, no evidence at all to hint at where he went. With the search turning up empty, detectives shifted to investigating what could have happened. They interviewed family, friends, and neighbors, but uncovered no conflicts or motives that might point to foul play. But as weeks turned into months, the case grew cold. Frustratingly for investigators and Jean's family and friends, there wasn't even proof that a crime had occurred. By the mid-1990s, the official investigation had hit a dead end, and Jean's loved ones were left in agonizing limbo. In the absence of evidence, several theories have emerged over the years about what might have befallen Jean Payne. One possibility is that he suffered some kind of medical crisis or accident while out feeding the animals. Perhaps he collapsed from pain or a health emergency and succumbed somewhere out of sight. Some have speculated he could have fallen into an old well or a hidden mine shaft on the property. However, given Jean's limited mobility, it's unlikely he went far from home. Searchers covered the immediate area thoroughly, and if he had been lying injured or deceased nearby, they almost certainly would have found him. The same goes for a wild animal attack. It's possible in the Arizona desert, but such an event would likely leave telltale signs like disturbed ground or blood. Another theory is that Jean was the victim of foul play. A random violent encounter or even a planned attack by someone who knew Jean can't be entirely ruled out. The remote setting could conceivably allow a perpetrator to confront him and hide the evidence. Some have wondered if Jean stumbled upon illegal activity, such as trafficking or poaching, and was silenced by the wrong people. Still, investigators found no indication of a struggle or violence at the scene, and no witnesses ever came forward to report suspicious vehicles or individuals in the area. On the other end of the spectrum is the idea that Jean intentionally walked away to start a new life. His family vehemently rejects this notion, noting that he left behind everything important to him: his wife, children, and all his personal belongings. Given his physical limitations and strong family ties, it's hard to imagine Jean staging his own disappearance and successfully avoiding detection. Now, more than 30 years later, the disappearance of Jean Payne remains one of Arizona's most haunting and perplexing unsolved mysteries. The case is still officially open with the Pima County Sheriff's Department, but progress has been elusive. After over a decade with no leads, Jean was officially declared dead in 2005, though of course that legal formality did nothing to reveal what actually happened to him. Sadly, his wife Peggy passed away in 2009, never learning her husband's fate, and to this day, no remains or solid clues have surfaced. Hey everyone, it's Jimmy here, just giving you another gentle reminder to hit the notification bell and turn on all those notifications. Also, if you're feeling generous, tossing me a clam or two through the membership or the Patreon is always much appreciated. In the quiet, rolling hills of upstate New York, a young couple named Wanetta and Tim Hoyt were living through an unimaginable nightmare. Between 1965 and 1971, they buried 5 of their children. First came Eric, then James and Julie, followed by Molly and Noah. One by one, they were laid to rest, each death a fresh wave of grief that left their small community heartbroken. For more than 20 years, their story was a medical tragedy, a case study in the cruel randomness of a newly understood condition. But a single decades-old medical paper held a clue to a different, more horrifying truth. This truth that would eventually reveal their story wasn't one of a tragic medical mystery at all. The pattern of death in the Hoyt household was as relentless as it was heartbreaking. It began in January 1965, when their firstborn, Eric, died at just 3 months old. 2 more children followed: James, born in 1966, and Julie, born in 1968. In September 1968, tragedy struck twice in 3 weeks. First, 48-day-old Julie died, and then 28-month-old James followed. 2 more children, Molly and Noah, were born in 1970 and 1971, respectively. Both also died within a few months of their birth. In each case, the cause of death was listed as SIDS, a diagnosis that, at the time, was shrouded in mystery and fear. Hoyt's crimes unfolded during a unique moment in medical history. The term was only formally introduced in 1969, following years of varied and often incorrect theories about why seemingly healthy infants perished in their sleep. It was a diagnosis of exclusion, applied when a thorough investigation and autopsy could find no other explanation. This lack of definitive knowledge created a diagnostic fog. For grieving parents, it offered a non-blaming explanation for an unbearable loss. For a predator like Wanetta Hoy, however, it provided the perfect cover. Her crimes coincided precisely with the period when the medical community had just enough knowledge to name the phenomenon, but not enough to distinguish it from a covert slaying. The Hoyt family's tragedy was so profound that it attracted the attention of Dr. Alfred Steinschneider, a pediatrician at Upstate Medical Center in Syracuse. The last 2 Hoyt babies, Molly and Noah, became subjects in his study. Wanetta reported that the infants suffered from breathing difficulties, and they were admitted to the hospital for monitoring. Molly even became the first baby in the United States to be sent home with an apnea monitor. Despite this, both children perished shortly after being discharged. In October 1972, Dr. Steinschneider published his findings in the journal Pediatrics. The paper, which referred to the Hoyts only as Family H, proposed that SIDS could be caused by prolonged apnea and that this condition might run in families. The 5 Hoyt deaths served as the tragic proof of his hypothesis. The truth remained buried until 1985, when a prosecutor from a neighboring county, William Fitzpatrick, was working on an unrelated case with similar facts. He consulted with Dr. Linda Norton, a forensic pathologist from Dallas, who reviewed Steinschneider's 1972 paper. She saw something different in the data, not a medical anomaly, but a pattern of a predator. She gave Fitzpatrick a chilling warning. He might have a serial perpetrator in his area. The warning stayed with Fitzpatrick. When he was elected district attorney in 1992, he used his new authority to track down the anonymous Family H. He sent the case files to Dr. Michael Baden, a renowned forensic pathologist with the New York State Police. After reviewing the medical records and the autopsies of the exhumed remains, the physician's conclusion was unequivocal. Wanetta Hoy was a monster. In March 1994, investigators made their move. A state trooper who knew Wanetta approached her at a post office and, using a clever ruse, he invited her to participate in a quote-unquote new research project on mothers who had been affected by SIDS. She agreed. During the subsequent interrogation, the friendly facade dropped, and under questioning, Wanetta Hoy confessed. She admitted to everything, and her motive was both shockingly simple and profoundly evil. The babies wouldn't stop crying, and she wanted to silence them. She described her methods in chilling detail, admitting she had used pillows, a bath towel, and the pressure of her own shoulder to smother them. Almost immediately, however, she recanted, claiming her confession was coerced. The validity of that confession became the central issue of her trial. The defense hired a forensic psychologist who concluded that Hoyt's dependent and avoidant personality disorders made her uniquely vulnerable to manipulative police tactics. Then, in a stunning development, even the prosecution's own psychiatric expert agreed that she was vulnerable and the police had manipulated her. The 1995 trial pitted two eras of science against each other. The prosecution, led by Fitzpatrick, built its case on Baden's modern forensic analysis and Hoyt's detailed confession. The defense countered with Dr. Steinschneider, who stood by his original SIDS diagnosis and argued that the confession was worthless. Prosecutors also speculated that Hoyt may have been suffering from Munchausen syndrome by proxy. This was a then-emerging psychological disorder in which a parent gains attention and sympathy through fabricated medical issues with a child. In April 1995, a jury found Wanetta Hoy guilty, and she was sentenced to 75 years to life in prison. But the story had one final bizarre twist. In August 1998, Hoyt died of pancreatic cancer before her appeal could be heard. Under New York law, because she died with her appeal still pending, her conviction was formally vacated. While a jury had declared her guilty, her legal record was officially wiped clean. It's the most famous statue on the planet, a creature of myth and stone that has stared out at the rising sun for millennia. But the Great Sphinx of Giza wasn't built in the way we usually imagine. It wasn't constructed block by block like the colossal pyramids it guards. Instead, it was revealed. It's a piece of the Giza Plateau itself, a single massive outcrop of limestone that ancient hands carved into a living form. This geological fact is the key to its entire story, a story that has become one of archaeology's most heated debates. For millennia, people from the ancient Egyptians themselves to modern scholars have asked who exactly gave this hunk of limestone its form and shape. The mainstream historical consensus, backed by a mountain of archaeological evidence, points to one man, the 4th dynasty pharaoh Khafre, who ruled around 2500 BC. In this view, the Sphinx was the final magnificent flourish of the Giza necropolis, a guardian for his pyramid complex. The argument for Khafre is built not on a single inscription, but on a web of interlocking physical evidence. It insists that the Sphinx cannot be understood as a standalone monument, but only as an integral, final piece of a grand architectural vision. The Giza Plateau wasn't developed haphazardly, but rather, it was a carefully planned sacred landscape. Under this theory, the Sphinx is deliberately positioned within Khafre's portion of it, a guardian aligned with his pyramid and temples. The most powerful evidence lies in the construction sequence, the literal order in which things were built. The Sphinx sits in a quarry. The southern wall of this quarry cuts directly through the foundation of the stone causeway that connects Khafre's pyramid to his valley temple. It proves that the causeway had to have been built before the quarry around the Sphinx was fully excavated. This simple, unchangeable fact places the Sphinx's creation squarely within the timeline of Khafre's reign. Furthermore, the two temples directly in front of the Sphinx Temple and Khafre's Valley Temple, are architecturally and geologically bound to it. They sit on the same prepared terrace and share an almost identical design for their inner courts, a style unique to Khafre's era and distinct from that of his father, Khufu. The link becomes unbreakable thanks to the work of archaeologist Mark Lehner. Through a process of geological analysis, his team demonstrated that the limestone blocks used to build the core of the Sphinx Temple were quarried directly from where the Sphinx sits. By mapping the unique fossil content and layers, or strata, of the bedrock, they showed that the layers in the temple blocks perfectly match the layers in the walls of the Sphinx enclosure. This provides a direct physical chain of custody. The act of carving the Sphinx out of the bedrock simultaneously produced the building materials for its temple. This leads to another crucial point. Both the Sphinx and its temple were never fully finished. The temple walls lack their final granite casing, and quarrying in the enclosure appears to have been abandoned abruptly. This strongly suggests the Sphinx complex was the very last element in Khafre's massive building program, likely interrupted by his death after a reign of about 25 years. This detail elegantly solves one of the biggest supposed mysteries, the lack of Old Kingdom texts claiming Khafra as the builder. In essence, if a building wasn't formally completed, it would never be dedicated, and if it wasn't dedicated, there's a vastly reduced chance we'd know who commissioned it. The mainstream consensus holds that the face on the Sphinx is an idealized portrait of Khafra himself. This is supported by the statue's context and by the discovery of a magnificent life-size statue of Khafra in his nearby valley temple. The Sphinx wears the royal headdress, a symbol exclusive to the pharaoh, cementing its role as a representation of divine kingship. The fusion of a lion's body, symbolizing raw power, with a king's head, symbolizing intellect and control, was a potent expression of the pharaoh's divine nature. However, some scholars suggest that the face bears a stronger resemblance to Khufu, his father, and may have been built in his honor. That said, ancient Egyptian royal depictions weren't about photorealistic accuracy. They were about projecting an idealized, divine image of the king. Despite the weight of archaeological evidence, alternative theories about the Sphinx's origin remain popular. The most prominent is the water erosion hypothesis, championed by American geologist Robert Schoch. He argues that the deep, vertical weathering on the Sphinx's body and its enclosure walls could only have been caused by thousands of years of heavy rainfall. If he is correct in his hypothesis, this would push its construction back to a much wetter period around 5000 BC. However, mainstream geologists offer a more direct explanation: salt weathering. For the overwhelming majority of its history, the Sphinx's body was buried in sand. Moisture from rain and groundwater absorbed up into the porous limestone, dissolving natural salts within the rock. As the stone dried, these salts recrystallized and expanded, causing the surface to flake off in a pattern that perfectly mimics water erosion. In general, this theory and others have not received any mainstream historical acceptance. Other theories suggest that the Sphinx is even older, though these theories are taken much less seriously than the water erosion hypothesis. After the fall of the Old Kingdom, it was largely abandoned and slowly consumed by the desert. By 1400 BC, more than 1,000 years after its creation, it was buried up to its neck in sand, a forgotten relic of a bygone age. Its history was dramatically rebooted by a young prince who would become Pharaoh Thutmose IV. As recorded on the granite dream stele he later erected between its paws, the prince fell asleep in the Sphinx's shadow and had a powerful dream. The statue spoke to him, promising him the throne of Egypt if he would clear away the sand that was choking it. Thutmose fulfilled his vow, excavating the monument and building a temple around it. In doing so, he gave the Sphinx a second life. It was transformed from a piece of funerary architecture into a major deity in its own right, an object of pilgrimage and worship for centuries to come. The Sphinx we know today, the wise speaking god of the desert, is almost entirely a product of this new kingdom reinvention.